Good morning. Welcome back to Alive and Thriving. Yesterday, we talked about the pyramid at Giza being a literal Bible in stone. We want to be focusing on the ideal of Christ, not the personality of Jesus. The unified self-field connection that we all occupy is the core of the religion, not the systems and the legalism or the dogma that we have put into place around the core.
We are fast approaching a cosmic event that is going to have a profound effect on our consciousness.
We are part and parcel of the one infinite creator, and
By presenting the ideal of Christ,
you embody the energy signature back of that ideal. This is Nathaniel J. with Alive and Thriving, and we are here to create graduate level Christians. If you're unfamiliar with the history of the pyramid, it once was encased entirely in white marble with a gold capstone. It no longer has said marble nor the capstone. It is still, however, a monument to Christ. It was built along exact proportional dimensions to things such as the circumference of the planet and the internal organization of buildings and rooms and corridors have specific mathematical timeline, chronological markers that give us a complete history of the world as we have currently experienced it and are experiencing it in our third great age of humanity, which is roughly 26,800 years long. If you would like a much more in-depth and detailed analysis of the Great Pyramid and its timeline, then I highly encourage you to check out David Wilcock's Ascension Mystery Schools 1, 2, and 3 coming up this summer. Now, here at Alive and Thriving, we're reading from Chapter 17, Book 3, Life and Teachings of the Masters of the Far East. For ages, civilization has been going downward. In fact, so long has the great race trod the dark path, it appeared that this great race would lose its identity and revert to savagery and barbarism entirely. It was recognized that only a few were holding fast to the pure concepts that belong to humanity, and that these few must withdraw into some conclusion in order that they could more readily come together, concentrate, and send out the whole light for the protection of humanity as a whole. Though this group's teachings were promulgated that the world would need a savior, a God-man who would and could step forth and through thought, word, and deed teach and show humanity first through its units, then in mass, that the Christ still lived in them and was just as vital as ever, although inactive. The Christ light had been submerged by them because of their ignorance and refusal to live a Christ-like life. Through the spoken word, prophecy, and the heralding of groups and individuals, the proclamation was sent out to humanity that the Most High had appointed a Savior who would again live true to humanity's highest concepts, and that a Savior would come forth at an appointed time. This was an edict of the Most High, which the Godhead poured out through a group of human units. Those units saw that in order to attract men to the Savior who would come among them, it would be necessary to set an appointed time for his advent, and that all should be instructed as to the method and purpose of his coming, even fixing the exact date of the crucifixion. This was not only necessary in order to give high teachings greater weight and vitality, but it was necessary to bring humanity's thoughts back to a focal or central point, as the majority were wandering entirely after strange gods. Humanity had gone so far afield that spiritual death was imminent. Thus, it was proclaimed that the body of this Messiah or Savior would be slain, and that his body would be placed in a rock-hewn tomb, and a complete resurrection would follow. Thus, humanity would again be shown that they could turn from being the sons of men and become the sons of God. The Christ of God always dwelling one with God. Thus, by living the God life, man would never go back into the welter. Peace and goodwill would then reign on earth. It was also written that this condition did exist and was before all things, and that he would teach them man's true heritage. Thus, he did exist and was the hidden one of the ages, and through the precepts that he taught flowed the fountain of God's providence and the full fruit of the earth that were for man's free use. These prophecies had become paganized and subverted before the advent of Jesus, and this subversion had extended to this day, leading many to believe that the basic elements of Christianity had been borrowed from previous religions, instead of knowing that it has always stood forth and accomplished humanity's highest ideal. The body of the mother, the one who would bring forth and nourish the Christ child, and the body of the father who would stand as a physical protector were also prepared for this immaculate birth, each complete yet united as one, to watch over the child who would grow into maturity among those he would teach. The mother was Mary and the father was Joseph, both representing the descendants of David, the true light bearer, from the seed of Abraham, meaning Abram, the bearer of the complete light from the great cosmos. The sons of man had reverted so low in the scale that the vibrations of their body were below those of the animal. By stepping forth and presenting the long-forgotten Christ, he knew full well they would attempt to ravage his body in a greater degree than the animal would. Unless human precepts are guided by the Christ light, they will sink lower than the animal. He knew he must be so definitely at one with the Christ in his dominion that they could not touch him unless he chose. Thus, he was fearless in choosing the role. Such an one choosing this role must be humble, knowing fully that such is the role that all have followed through their Christ life. Thus, gathering consolidates the idea more definitely. You can observe the silent influence wielded through the thousands of humble souls gathered here. You can calculate this fully by taking for the basis of your deductions the fact that one man standing forth in his Godhead, giving forth in fullest measure, conquers the world, and death is no more. And to this, the influence of one more who is as powerful. The influence of the two is fourfold greater than the one. Wherever two or more are gathered in thy name, there I am also. Then multiply this by the numbers gathered here, and you can realize the power that is radiating forth to the whole world from this multitude. So when a ton of people are gathered together and their focus is central on the Godhead or pure consciousness, there is what is called the Rishi effect or the Maharishi effect, and you can literally reduce global crime, poverty, suffering, war, and terror by 72%. This is a documented scientific fact. Lynn McTaggart has compiled tons of research on this, and David Wilcock organizes these events on a weekly basis when he is doing his Ascension Mystery School teachings through YouTube Live as well as through his own private channel. With such a power center in full radiation, the world is reborn, revitalized, and renewed instantly, whether the units of humanity realize it or not. Such an assembly has gathered in stated locations throughout the world every 12 years, far down the ages, and long before Neptune threw off her mantle of God. Their numbers were less in the earlier days, but the radiations going out from the groups have attracted others without an audible word being spoken. The first small group grew into a multitude, then one from that multitude formed another group, and so on, until 12 groups were formed, and this is the 12th or last group, making 13 in all. This group has assembled to consolidate and unite the 12 with the first group, making 13 united into one complete group, yet meeting as the original groups have met in different places to facilitate the accessibility of the assembling places. This is symbolic and allegorical, and they're talking literally as well as symbolically about the tree of life. So, if you're familiar with Atlantean civilization's history, then you know that it was aligned in such a fashion as to form the Tree of Life, or the Kabbalah. And the 13th gathering, or the 13th city in the civilization of Atlantis was named Poseidon, and it existed on an island just off the coast, the northern coast of the Atlantean continent. And the masters were such at the time that they could direct the Earth's energy to vortex out of specific geographic locations on the surface of the continent of Atlantis. And those geographic locations corresponded to the Kabbalah or the Tree of Life. And when they talk about not a spoken word need be uttered in order to attract consciousness to these energy vortexes, that is exactly what happened with the Great Migration of the Muites. The masters, upon learning that Mu, the continent, was going to sink beneath the ocean, began to assemble a new living place for all of Earth's inhabitants, and that was the continent of Atlantis. And they then directed the Earth's energy to manifest in those geographic locations to resemble the Tree of Life. And then the Muites, being very attuned to intuition, migrated their ways over to the continent of Atlantis. It is on the continent of Atlantis that we get the arrival of the Hebrew nation or tribe, as well as we get the, you might call them Canaanites, or the progenitors of the Cain lineage, you might say, those who have a warring disposition. The Hebrews came upon authorization and invitation and acceptance into this earthly realm, whereas the Canaanites did not. They forced themselves upon the Atlantean civilization, and there were wars, and then there was peace, and then there was a catastrophe, and then there were more wars, and then we find ourselves where we are today, currently trying to throw off the yoke of the Canaanites as they have amassed worldly power through malevolent genius, and they have enslaved humanity's minds, and their most insidious weapon, which there are many, is cell phone towers and the broadcast of 4G and 5G signals, in which they can directly manipulate your mind if you are not taking preemptive measures to guard yourself against these radiations. And those preemptive measures are daily meditation, as well as organite pyramids and crystals around your home, and then certain protective rituals that Dr. Albert Villolotto and shamans teach. And you can go to the Four Winds Society for that information, and you can take his free online courses in which he instructs you on how to organize these protective spheres and bubbles around yourself, your home, your community, even a city. And there's another powerful one that I failed to mention. That's homotherapy, or Agnihotra. It's an inverted pyramid in which you conduct a daily meditation and fire ritual. And it has a positive effect on the ionosphere, or you pull the ionosphere down to your geographic location. You invite it in through the fire that is burning inside of this pyramid. There is no attempt at definite organization. Neither are there any hard or fast rules adhered to. It is only organized as each individual is organized within, and through that organization is drawn to one of the groups. The location of the assemblies has never been revealed to people in general, which proves that there has been no attempt at organization. And they're speaking specifically here about after the fall of Atlantis. They're talking about as we have been sojourning across this physical plane, post-Atlantean fall, when there was a tear in what you might call the veil of consciousness between physical and non-physical here on planet Earth due to a catastrophe. After that catastrophe, the nations of Atlantis went their separate ways. You had individuals assemble in 3 different regions. That would have been Egypt, Tibet, Nepal area, and South America, Peru. And they started civilization over again, made their way up to Central America too, over here in this hemisphere. So the assembly, which will gather at 12 o'clock tomorrow, will fully consolidate all the groups under the first group, the 12 building a pyramid symbolizing the completion of the Christ ideal in man, and the 13th constituting the capstone or crown. Now, again, back to the pyramid, the reason why there's no capstone currently is because we are waiting on humanity to fully realize their Christ identity. And once this occurs, then the pyramid will retain its capstone. And back to the Tree of Life, the Tree of Life that is organized into 13 spheres, and each sphere represents one of the attributes of the Godhead. And so when you get human beings consolidating in regards to these characteristics of the Godhead and focusing their intent on pure consciousness, you produce a powerful Maharishi effect that, like I talked about earlier, has a profound effect on humanity. It can influence humanity for the better because the individuals who are gathering together are doing so along benevolent ideals. The same can be said for individuals that gather with malevolent ideals, and they have been doing that since Babylon, or before, way before, since Atlantis. And their culminating genius malevolency today is, like I said, cell phone towers, human trafficking, and child sex slavery, and the drug trade. All the 13 groups will assemble as separate groups in the same location as before, yet the assembling of one or all of the groups will be the same as though all were meeting with the head group, which will be accomplished tomorrow. Aside from just assembling for consolidation of the 13 groups into one group, 12 from each of the 12 groups will go out to assist in forming 12 more. Multiply this by 12, which will be 144 groups. When these groups are augmented by other units of humanity, there will again branch out into groups of 12. Thus, a pyramid formed of groups in the order of 12 will be erected until it encompasses the earth. The only requisite necessary to become one or a part of these groups is first to present the Christ ideal to yourself, then give forth Christ to the world in thought, word, and deed. You are then one with this whole great group, and where you meet God, they must meet with you in your home, your own sanctuary, be it in the most remote part of the world, on the mountain peak, or in the busy marts of trade. One with God is the determining factor always. The instant you lift your thought to the Christ, your body responds to the Christ vibration. Then you respond to the same vibratory influence that is emanating from the vast throng, and the multiplied energy of its numbers picks up your Christ ideal and spreads its broadcast to the whole world, and your influence is carried on and on with the combined whole in a great tidal wave of thought. Thus, instead of remaining in the former seclusion, these precepts will become worldwide. To such a group, there need be no head save the great Godhead of the whole human race. No form, no sect, no creed is necessary. Declare you are the God and command the self to live true to this ideal concept in thought, word, and deed. Thus, you do conceive and bring forth the Christ. These vibrations, once established, are never diminished, though the unit or the individual be unconscious of their existence. But if you keep on and on, you will become conscious of these vibrations, which is a far greater experience than any other could be. Thus, the focal point which is established is true and can never be erased. And to this point, every human unit must eventually come. To such, the whole wide vista of the universe is opened, and there are no restrictions added to or imposed upon the individual. The vista imposed by the human vision may be outside these vibrations, but it may be brought within the range of vibratory vision. There may not appear to be an individual here within the vibratory ray which the human vision imposes, but each is here and we recognize him. You, who have walked or ridden all the way, have at times glimpsed this fact, or you would not be here. And he's referring to the masters actually attaining spiritual vision in proximity to these occurrences, these phenomena taking place, and bringing it upon at will. With such a united humanity, can the battle of Gog and Magog or Armageddon be fought? Can man-made manifestations of law bring forth a force that will trample over God law, which is ruling above and coexisting with all force? Here but one God-man needs say no, and it will be accomplished, as all are in unison and respond in unison. No force need be exerted. The force to harm that those in the lower vibrations are sending out can be concentrated and returned to them with true love and blessing. This is the Aikido principle. If they resist, they will but destroy themselves, and those who are returning the love force need not so much as lift a hand. If you're unfamiliar with Aikido, it is a Japanese martial art practice, but it stems from this universal concept and principle that, from whence you came, you shall return again, or that which you send out is that which you receive, or you reap what you sow. So if you put a seed of corn in the ground, you're going to get a stalk of corn if it's healthy and it grows and the conditions are right. and then you might eat it, right? So you put it in, it grows up, and then it returns to you. The same thing is done in Aikido, where if you are face-to-face with a combatant or an assailant, you essentially use their momentum and their energy to knock them off balance, and then once off balance, the momentum of their energy destroys them, if you will. It takes them to the ground, or something like that if it's martial arts. But if it's, let's say, a particle beam cannon, and it is shot at, for example's sake, the moon, and the moon, here's a better analogy. When the Apollo missions launched from the Earth, they were traveling straight towards the moon. And in order to achieve enough velocity to return back to Earth without rockets, they had to enter into the moon's gravitational pull, which they then slingshotted around the moon and then headed back towards the Earth. So imagine if the rockets never landed on the moon, but rather they just headed straight towards the moon, and then the moon, with its gravitational field, was able to prevent the rocket from entering its atmosphere and onto its surface, and instead it just sent the planet or the rocket around the outside in a slingshot fashion and back towards the Earth. That is the Aikido principle. It essentially absorbs whatever comes towards it and then sends it back to its point of origin. And if the point of origin is fixated on harm and destruction, then it's not going to be in a receptive mode. It's going to be in a projecting mode. And it's essentially like keeping your arm stretched straight out as a vehicle like comes barreling towards you. It's just going to crush you, right? But if you like subtly move out of the way at the last second, then that vehicle might crush into whatever is behind you. That's the Aikido principle. You absorb and you redirect the energy that is coming towards you back towards where it came. These groups stand as the Great Pyramid has stood, indestructible down through the ages, as a witness in stone to humanity that the Christ in man was fully established long before man's advent. Man, as the Christ, has never been separated from the Godhead. That this Great Pyramid is such a witness is fully established by its age and purity of form, construction, and intellectual value. It has been preserved and mentioned as the Great Pyramid throughout millennia. All the scientific information that is embedded in the huge mass was not placed there for the advancement of science, as men must be well versed in science in order to interpret its knowledge. And this is exactly what scholars have done, and David Wilcock comprises in the Ascension Mystery Schools. Its great antiquity and wonderful structure have set it aside as a mystery to mankind. Within its mass is exposed the secret of the universe. Each delineation is in precise terms and methods and exact science. This was preordained and is working toward the harmonious consumption of man, standing forth as the Christ of God, completely amalgamated with God. The culmination of this accomplishment will place the capstone upon the Great Pyramid. So when humanity attains its Christ-conscious state in waking consciousness, then we will see returned to the pyramid its capstone. I would imagine that if things were going to really take place in the physical like that, we would also see the marble returned to the outside of the pyramid, and it would then stand again as a great white beacon to humanity. And that's a beautiful image to behold, right? If you want to think about yourself as being a pyramid, imagine yourself as being that completely white marble pyramid with that gold capstone on top and standing forth for all to see. You know, you're reflecting light beautifully, you're sending out good vibes, you're sound on all sides, and you are able to weather anything that comes before you and stand the test of time. Folks, I thank you so much for being here. My name is Nathaniel J. This is Alive and Thriving. Go forth, prosper, be abundant, love, and care for one another. Namaste.